everyone. Welcome to FormFest 2024. My name is Quinny Sanchez Lopez, and I'm the advisor for the Digital Identity of Community of Practice, which sits under the Digital Benefits Network at the Beck Center for Social Impact and Innovation at Georgetown University. You can learn more about the work using the link in the chat. Using the chat, feel free to say hello with your name and where you're joining us from. Throughout this call, we are going to use the Q&A function to capture your questions, which you can find on the right side of the screen. Please add them as you think of them, and I'm going to wait to ask them out loud until after all the speakers have finished preparing or giving their presentations. We're going to go ahead and dive right into our sessions. Our speakers are going to introduce themselves briefly, and you can also check out their full bios by clicking on the speaker profiles. We encourage you to also connect with them through LinkedIn. So I'm going to go ahead. Just FYI, each speaker group will have about 25 minutes to present, and we're going to have 10 minutes at the end for questions. Again, welcome to FormFest, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Sarah, Emily, and Verenicé.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are so excited to see you and to talk to you today. Today, I'm presenting. My name is Emily Lippolis. I'm presenting with Sarah Rodriguez and Verenicé Ramirez, who are going to introduce themselves and their projects in a little bit. Today, what we're talking about is creating equitable and accessible legal forms to address the justice gap. But a caveat, one, we're not really going to be talking about like web consortium accessibility. We're talking specifically about how we've used a really important tool, the trauma-informed framework, as part of our approach to designing forms and products within the judicial court sphere. And that also being said, we're talking about trauma. So we encourage you to do whatever you need to do during this session or any session to take care of yourself. Don't worry, we'll take it as a compliment, but I will say there are very cute dogs in the next section, so you might want to come back. So again, my name's Emily Lippolis. My project was in Kansas. I'm still in Kansas. What we did was we started, what we wanted to do was create essentially a TurboTax for self-represented litigants in Kansas. I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Emily Lippolis. I'm a UX designer. I was a Judicial Innovation Fellow for the past year. Before that, I was a lawyer in election administration. And then before that, I was a costume designer. And now I'm here as a UX designer for courts. So our project in Kansas was to create essentially an e-filing system for self-represented litigants. These are people who don't have lawyers, right? So it's all based on the US web design system. There are two key components. We had a dashboard where people could see all the aspects of their cases, all the information they've submitted, really have control over their information. And then the second part was a guided interview, right? And this is really important, right, to guide people through those legal forms without people even really having to see the forms. So up next, my friend Sarah is gonna talk about her work.
Hi, I'm Sarah Rodriguez. I've spent the last 8 years as a designer in digital and innovation spaces in government on issues like homelessness, access, and health and policing. For the past year, I've been helping to lead the pilot and scale mobile court program at the downtown Austin Community Court. Mobile court brings court and case management services out into the communities at places like libraries, shelters, neighborhood centers, and houses of faith. Individuals are given the chance to identify and resolve what are called Class C misdemeanors. So they're generally for quality of life issues like camping, public intoxication. If you've ever been pulled over for an officer for speeding, been given a ticket, it's those kind of things. So that individuals who are experiencing homelessness don't cycle through the criminal legal system and lose access to services and belongings. So I'll turn it over to Verenicé to talk about her project.
Hi, everyone. My name is Verenicé Ramirez. I am also a Judicial Innovation fellow. My place was in the Utah State Court, and I actually have multiple projects, but the one that I want to discuss here in this presentation is redesigning paper forms through the UX methods. I am also a UX designer. My background, I do not have a law degree, but I do have a lot of experience with social work. I used to be a case manager at a nonprofit for formerly incarcerated folks, and that really propelled me into thinking, who is designing these things that my clients are always sort of needing but don't understand. And so at Utah, I had the privilege to work with an amazing team at the Self-Help Center. And I really did try to use sort of user-centered approach. And as Emily mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, thinking about it through a framework of understanding that a lot of self-represented litigants, especially when it comes to eviction, divorce, child support, they do have traumatizing experiences with the legal system. And so, and aside from that, it's within their own, lives that they've had these experiences. And so it was really interesting to create these solutions, right? As a designer, thinking like, awesome, I have these amazing solutions. And then having to test them with people, that was like a whole other ball game to really take into consideration how could I possibly ask these people for help. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like in the follow-up. But yeah, so overall, I was able to create this new certificate of service that's going to be implemented in new forms that are being created by the court. It was sort of a compromised win. This is not the original design that I came up with, and but it worked out, and I look forward to talking a little bit more about what that experience was like. So I'll hand it over back to my team.
So why
Emily,
is this important? Thank you. So why is this important? The three of us are working in the judicial sphere, and there's really kind of what we found through our research, through our experiences, is there's sort of three sort of traumas, right, that are happening all at once. One, people coming into the system have their own stuff that they're coming with. The reason people are there is probably a bummer, right? It's probably not inherently traumatizing to have to get, like a protection order against your family member, right? These things, being evicted, right? These things are inherently traumatic unto themselves. And then the third thing that we found is that the system is inherently sort of traumatic, right? And factually, like interactions with the legal system commonly results in eroded mental health and financial stability. If you've ever been a plaintiff, if you've ever had to do this, it's stressful. Even if you come from, if you're educated, right, or have a, pretty solid financial background, it's still very stressful. So thinking about how the system treats people who don't even have those advantages, we found that it was there were a lot of changes that we could be making to make that right to litigation more accessible to all people. Specifically, a big part, a lot of Americans experience this problem. 60% have had a legal problem with the last 4 years. About 70% were not satisfied with the result, right? And you would think in an adversary system, that would be like 50%, or even with mediation in ADR, that would be more than 50%. We're at 70% unsatisfied. And I don't know if that means, like, what does that mean about the system? And then, 30% of people with legal claims don't feel empowered to act on those claims, right? So do you have a right, if you don't feel empowered to act on that right? So these are all things that we think about as designers as we're trying to sort of fix these problems. But I think Sarah can explain our solution, or a part of our solution.
Yeah, so in this presentation, we're going to talk about how as designers, we've embedded trauma-informed practices into our work and prompts for thinking through responding through trauma in your own work to make this more accessible, to think of a larger overall accessibility toolkit for you. We've recognized that, our organizations and systems in which we do this work can be traumatizing. And we as designers are vulnerable to vicarious trauma and re-traumatization. Unfortunately, that topic would take a whole nother presentation, but please feel free to reach out after the presentation and connect with us. Next slide. So I just kind of wanted to set the table and provide a brief background on our concept of trauma. sort of the understanding and normalization of the concept began in the 60s and 70s and was largely centered around PTSD and the psychological impact of war, veterans until the 1990s, 1998, when there was the field was widened by the work done on the Adverse Childhood Experience Survey, which looked at the effect of trauma that occurs during early childhood. Trauma-informed care was developed in healthcare systems in the early 2000s, and then a little over a decade later, trauma-informed care expanded into other fields like education and architecture as part of a larger trauma-informed design methodology. And so now, we have expanded and much more nuanced framework, which includes concepts like vicarious trauma, acute stress disorder, and compassion fatigue. And so this framework for trauma-informed care presented on the slide may look a little different depending on which organization you're working with, or use different terminology. But the general tenets are the same: safety, trust, and transparency, peer support, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment and choice, cultural, historic, and gender issues. Next slide. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about safety. It's a big topic. These are just a couple of the processes or the things to think through, creating spaces and experience that acknowledge, plan for, and respond to trauma. It can be as simple as limiting the amount of, how many people are in a user interview, or like making sure that individuals have access to exits, as well as researchers allowing individuals a chance to stop or pass, or letting them know that they won't be penalized or will still receive compensation if they ask to stop if things get too much. And so working with your team to provide different individuals, different options for your individuals to engage with, it might not feel good, but also thinking through how are we accountable, providing information if someone has a complaint or an issue, just thinking through how we make this the best possible process and feel the safest, both physically and emotionally, both for designers and for the folks we're working with. So one of the projects that I worked on, next slide, when we took mobile court into the community, a lot of people's first reaction was, are you going to arrest me? That can be, I think, somewhat common in the legal space, especially in the criminal space. Some people refuse to take part because of that underlying fear. So our focus really became, how do we create a safe space and processes that people feel okay with engaging in? And so we worked with individuals who are experiencing homelessness or had lived experience of homelessness to identify places in the process, but also in the form, but also the process that were confusing and scary. For example, someone's marital status. You wouldn't think that would be like a big thing, but one of our lived experience, one of the members from our lived experience group, the Austin Homelessness Advisory Committee, which we sort of meet with regularly, and pay them for their time and really help them get involved with larger homelessness issues from a policy service level, noted, that she'd been previously married, but, she felt single. So she's like, I don't want to lie on this form, but I don't know what to put. Also one of the other data points was immigration. I'm Chicana, so like I, in my personal life, know that can, be a very scary question to have to answer. So we're able to remove those data points to create that sort of safety. We also kind of, one of the things we did around language and content was make things a little softer. We put in places where if someone had trouble remembering, right, all the tickets they had, all of the tickets, whether it was parking, or camping, they could say, I don't know. We had one client who had questions about civil cases, one client who had previously experienced a traumatic brain injury, and so wasn't able to recall all of the tickets. And so we didn't want to, we wanted to make sure that there was confidence in the form, so people felt safe. Next slide. I turn it back over to you, Emily.
All right. So the next principle we want to talk about is trust and transparency. I think if you work in government and saw the Trust in Government report that came out over the past couple of years, you know that this is really important for us, right? We need to be trusted as the institution. We need people to trust that this is the correct website. And, you know, they need to know, are they in the right place? Are they doing the right thing? Are they going the right way? And also, what is going to happen with their information, right? We heard about in the previous in the keynote about form flubs, like the data to nowhere, right? Like the form to nowhere, right? Where does my stuff go? Who keeps it? And is it safe, right? And this is super important, we find, in the judicial context, right? Because we have people who, you know, they may have multiple claims, and it could really, whether or not their address becomes public, whether or not their information becomes less safe, could be the difference between filing a claim and not, right? Because the risk of having their information out there could be greater than whatever benefit, you know, they could achieve through the civil courts, right? So just one way that we can kind of establish trust. This is something, I took this right from the US web design system. This is what informed my whole project. It's really a great system, but they have this great form summary sample, right? And it does a bunch of really great things. One, I have to get on here. Oh, okay. It gives you a time estimate, right, of how long this is going to take, right? It respects your time enough to tell you how much of it it's going to take, right? That can really matter if you're, you know, filling this out after work, if you only have 10 minutes for your lunch break, right? These things really matter to people. Tells them everything they need to complete that form, right? So before you even start, you can go through, you can make sure you have that stuff. You know, it's a surprising number of people do not have their birth certificates, so that's a whole process they have to go through, right? And they might not want to sort of get the time tolling, right, until all of their documents are ready. Also, just acknowledging that this might be difficult, right? Just acknowledging the sort of humanity of it, right? Courts feel very clinical and very formal, but really just a lot of emotions, a lot of feelings are happening in there. And there's a lot of emotional stress that goes along with filling out these forms, right? And just acknowledging that, I think, can make a difference. And then even just saying, hey, you can save and come back, right? This doesn't have to be a one-shot thing. If, you know, maybe your memory is not going to kick in until tomorrow, right? Maybe things aren't going to, maybe you need to take your time. You know, you can save and come back. And that's a really important feature that we really had to think through with Kansas, of how do we make sure that anyone, even someone who maybe doesn't have access to a device, could be able to save their information safely, put it in the right place, and be able to access it again. So then another really important part of this is peer support. This is something really based, I really saw a lot in the research. This is, you know, your ability to get and receive support from other people. What I found in my research in observing the courts were that there was like this other group of people, right, that were not litigants, but they were there with the litigants. And they were there to either provide, they were there to do multiple things. They were there to provide emotional support. They were there to find the vending machines in the bathrooms. They were there to translate. There's one translator in the Wyandotte County Courthouse, right? And she's running around everywhere. There's no possible way that the court can provide the level of support to litigants that these people can provide. So I made one of them a persona, right? And asked that the court moving forward consider these people as part of the design. So moving next to collaboration and mutuality, Verenicé.
Yeah, so nothing for us without us. As Emily was saying, I think one of the things, because it is sort of a factor of like trauma-informed care and thinking, is collaboration. And so not only thinking about the peers as like the other people helping the self-represented litigants as like people who are important to the process, but also other people who are working within the same space. How do we make all the people all part of this, you know, design process, not just the user, but the person helping the user and the person helping the court? How do we empower people to give us honest feedback and build relationships with organizations to sort of keep everyone accountable. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yes. So in practice, for me at the Utah State Courts, we actually worked with a legal aid organization called Timpanogos Legal Center. Utah is very interesting because Salt Lake City is the main city within the whole state, and it is a very rural space outside of Salt Lake. And I got the chance to visit these other small towns where I ended up interviewing many people, and the feedback that I got was people don't understand what they don't understand what certificate of service is. So already that was very collaborative because I was already getting a lot of information, not from the user themselves, not from the self-represented litigant themselves, but from the people around them who help them sometimes when they show up at court. And the awesome thing that I was able to build here was once I got to the point of redesigning the certificate of service and needing to sort of test it, I got in touch with the legal aid organization, and they have already sort of built that collaboration with self-represented litigants. They already trust self-represented litigants already trust this organization because they know that that's where they need to go to get help. And so they have these thing called Tuesday, nights. This is a poster board that they have out on every Tuesday at 5 p.m. And people make a long line and they tell the person who's doing the intake what they need, for their moment. And what ends up happening is that we ended up building this really awesome collective union where we know that anytime we need user testing, we go to this place because the connection and the collaboration is already implemented there.
We're just going to finish up really quickly. Sorry. Thank you. One of our last ones is empowerment and choice. I think we all kind of know why this one is important. I already talked about my dynamic questionnaire. And really the goal here was to give people the choices to put it in their hands to be able to fill out all these complicated legal forms quickly, easily in their own language.
Yeah, and then our last one is the culture, historic gender issues. It's really about sort of recognizing discrimination and institutional racism that creates disparities in regards to resources, access, and environments, and how we can address those issues and taking them into consideration. So one of the, next slide, sorry. So yeah, I can just talk briefly about sort of my project in relation to that. I'm not seeing it on the screen, maybe it's just my view. So yeah, DAC has made a commitment to including equity in our work. One of the things I was lucky to do was work with a clinical case manager, shout out to Jenna Pywell, to test an intake test. It's called the intersection major discrimination index survey. And it really kind of looked at embedding equity into our intensive case management process to ensure that we were being more equitable in that process. And so there are a couple of rounds of testing. We tested with folks in the first round to see if there were any heavy emotions that were prompted when they were answering this question. And then the second round of testing, we did directly with people with lived experience who were clients of Downtown Austin Community Court. And then the final round of testing, we focused on how do we make sure that folks didn't feel like they had to answer, that they were appropriately supported, and that we were designing in a way that people felt they had sort of the agency and the ability to say no and pass and make that a very regular process. Next slide. So yeah, these are kind of our takeaways. Trauma informed is really important to thinking through how to be accessible when you're doing your work and make sure that this is accessible to everyone. It applies to sort of all the steps in the design process, and it's just really a good process and good principles and a good framework to have. And so next slide, here are some further resources that we've used that are really valuable. And the next slide, and the final is sort of like these more things that you can use directly in your practice. So design resources like consent forms and repositories where we have folks who are doing some really great work. Thank you for your time. And please feel free to ask us any questions or reach back out to us at any time. We're happy to chat.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. That was a wonderful presentation, and you received a lot of love in the chat. I would encourage you to take some time to check that out. We are going to wait to answer some of these questions live till the end of our time. But next up, we're going to hear from Lucy and Andrea.
Hi, everybody. Give us just a moment while we get this. Everybody, give us just a moment while we get this. Okay, I think we've got it all set up. Does everything look okay, Quinny? Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Okay, I will pause and say, well, one, Andrea and I are so pleased to join you all this afternoon. And I would also like to just call out that this is going to be in like sharp relief to the really wonderful and powerful learnings that came from the cohort just before us. I want to like acknowledge how important and cool and amazing those frameworks are. And I hope you sort of see a trickle effect in the work that we've done with our adoption application improvement. So please, you've been warned, there's a lot of pet puns, you're gonna see cute dog pictures. So hopefully this should be both a relief in topic, but also just like send you off into the afternoon feeling good, and maybe you hug on your furry animals at home when you see them later today. But Andrea and I are pleased to chat with you about, so I'm gonna introduce myself really briefly. My name is Lucy McFarland. I am the Director of Digital Services with the City of South Bend's Innovation and Technology Department. The digital services team is kind of a net new group in this last year, and Andrea is a member of my team.
Hello, I'm Andrea Sandusky. Yeah, I am part of Lucy's wonderful team, and I'm super excited to be here. We've been making some really awesome things that have helped out our community and residents and city itself, so we're excited to share this with you.
So a little bit about digital services, first and foremost. There's kind of two things I like to offer up in my spiel about us, which is the first thing is we're an internal service department. So the way that we work is we work and on behalf of any and all of the divisions and departments across the city's organization. And the way that I like to position how we might support other folks is the first thing is if there's any sort of like rote administrative work that really grinds your gears and just like makes the dailiness of your job really hard, we want to know about it. That administrative burden doesn't necessarily have to exist, and there could be ways through low code means or even just solution design, non-code related improvement opportunities. We want to know about it. And then the other half of our work is anything that's resident facing online. I want to know about it, and I want to be a part of either creating it, consulting with you on it, or developing it ourselves on your behalf. So part of that is like, oh gosh, the internet opens up really, really wide. So our spectrum of work is anything from like low code development, which is what Andrea does quite a bit of, all the way through to, we might make an Instagram post every once in a while. So that's about us. I want to speak to this particular example of our work that we've been able to accomplish this past year, which is we worked with our Animal Resource Center in town. So we have a quasi-humane society arm of our code enforcement department. So the South Bend Animal Resource Center, they actually reached out to us early last year. They heard that we were a new team in INT, and they were like, we hate this stuff as part of our job. You know, they were so wonderfully vulnerable with us about what was frustrating about the adoption application process and the tools involved. And we were like so ready to dive in. We felt immediately confident that we would be able to at least hear what they have to say and be an encouraging partner with them if there weren't any digital interventions. But turns out we were able to support them with some digital transformation. Okay. So again, I forewarn you that there's going to be pet puns and pet pictures, just like relish in it for all you can. But if you do have to dip or you just decide to stop listening to me, which is totally an option, there's our TLDR for this latter half of the session is, all right, so our animal resource team, we'll call them SBARC, they came to us and they were really frustrated with the lengthy and burdensome way that their adoption application, one, contributed to not enough adoption applications from the customers or end users, and then it was like undue burden on their internal staff. So the tools that were in place, the process that was in place, the questions that were being asked were contributing to a lot of administrative work that really was getting in the way of what the customers ultimately want, which is a forever friend. So we stepped in and we offered a solution that was a streamlined and much more user-centric form. It was very customer-oriented, but on the flip side of that, our other customer was the SBARC staff, and we were able to increase qualified applications to get those pups out of the shelter, while at the same time decrease that administrative burden for our SBARC team. So we have a bit of a sort of an approach and a process to our solution design here in the team. And one of those fundamental like values and positions that we keep is we try to remain, and for as long as possible, pretty system and tool agnostic. So we like to start almost from a blank slate. Just tell us what you're experiencing, show us what it looks like. Let us, we will talk to you and yap with you for as long as you want. We're going to sit behind you at your desk. We just want to watch and observe and listen for as long as possible, so that when we come to them with solutions or interventions later, they are directly informed by the experience of that staff or that end user. So let me talk you through some of the things, some of the steps we followed. So our approach, namely, is wonderfully informed by our department mantra, which is listen first, build with. This is how we like to work. We love spending time with our partners, especially SBARC, because they have a kitten room, you guys. So like we'll go and we'll hang out with them and then hang out with the cute cats and the dogs. So anyway, it was purely selfish on our part to help these folks. So a couple of the ways that we like to listen: site visits, just like I described. We went and saw the dogs, we went and saw the staff for a little bit. And then we do user interviews. We even do the process ourselves just to like see what it would feel like, talk to a couple end users, so folks that recently had applied, what their experience was like. So just like get the big picture of how things are looking and what it looks like. And then one of the outputs of those things, which we love, is a process map. And it can come kind of in all shapes and sizes. We're not too prescriptive in the way that diagram ends up. We just want it documented. Sometimes showing up to a meeting with our partners with their process diagrammed just turns on all of these amazing light bulbs, and improvements for that process or for that process owner can sometimes bubble up on their own that aren't necessarily digital or form in nature. They could be a little bit more analog or a little bit offline, and that process owner can like find those things within their control to improve against that we wouldn't necessarily have to do anything for. It's just seeing those things all in one place ensures we're accurate and we're meeting their expectations, and that we've heard them, that we've listened effectively. So that's really critical. We will never move into a building stage until we've had everybody kind of like sign on the dotted line that we've captured this accurately, as well as identified the places where the pain points are occurring and that potential interventions could happen. So when we head into that build with stage, the developing stage, the designing stage, we do this in a pretty agile way. We work in sprints, we work in 2-week chunks. So we meet with our client partners those every 2 weeks to demo. For any of you that are like digital transformation humans, demos are the way. We love being able to get our products in front of our end users and our partners, because you know, sometimes our listening, we thought we were accurate and turns out we were slightly wrong. And that happens. And the sooner we can catch it, especially with demos, product demos, the better it is for our continuous improvement planning later and change management later. Okay, so in our listen first, this is a goofy screenshot of the process diagramming example. Don't squint and try to read it. This is just like conceptual purposes. I just wanted to demonstrate that like a process, like just doing it and having that documentation is really, really important. It doesn't have to be like perfect. It doesn't have to look perfect, but just getting it written down is usually a huge win for anybody that we partner with. And so all of the interviewing, site visits, process observations, all of it turns into this really kind of like silly, quantifiable and visual thing that in the end of this process with the SBARC team turned into the tools and the systems that were part of this flow were ultimately contributing the most to getting in the way of what our customer wanted, which is a pet. They just wanted their forever friend. And we were able to identify the steps in the flow that were contributing the most. And it turned out to be the tools at play were really conflating that experience for the end user and the admin staff. So lots of redundant questions with no branching logic. There wasn't a document upload feature for required documentation. And there wasn't any kind of like digital comms, nice things with like next steps and email confirmation. You guys, it was not great. Please forgive the Wizard of Oz reference. So what we heard, too many questions, took too long for the form to do. It was, and the current platform just wasn't meeting the actual requirements of this process. So it wasn't ever clear to the applicant, even at the end, like when they would hear from the SBARC team for their application. So all that to say, we knew that whatever we like took this and transformed this into was going to be at least a step above some of that experience. Because even just like baseline internet interactions had to be just a little bit better than this. So we knew that we needed to get a form live that had everything in it for the staff to evaluate upon submission. They needed it all in one place, and they didn't want to do the gross back and forth. So because that upload feature was missing from this form experience for the end user to it, like tenant information, lease information, vet information if they already have pets, sort of like just like they're like legally required as part of this process. But all that to say, the admin staff were doing that over the phone, over email, or even other just in person. And that back and forth took forever, upwards of a week, depending on what that back and forth looked like between all of those different stakeholders. So we knew that we needed to be able to capture that to help alleviate some of that administrative burden. But on the flip side of that, we also knew that we were probably asking superfluous questions and we were putting too much of the question burden on the end user. So we knew we also needed to streamline the form in some way. So this was like our ideal state. Okay, if we can accomplish these couple of things, oh man, that's going to move the needle quite a bit for this team. So I'm going to hand it over to Andrea, who did this stuff, who like literally built these things, and let her talk you through that. But hopefully these cute animal pictures will keep making you feel good this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you, Lucy. Yeah, so the build with portion of this project, we kind of just brought them along with us along the ride here. So, along, I guess, the yellow brick road, if we want to keep with the Wizard of Oz puns here. So, yeah, and then we wanted to really build something that was a natural extension of their current process. Like we didn't want to add an additional burden of having to learn, like a whole new system or, new training for them to, kind of have to get used to in their process. They're very, very busy over there. So, yeah. And also, yeah, we decided to switch over. Toto, we're not in Microsoft anymore. Switch them from the Microsoft Forms over into a JotForm solution. So their current digital tools were contributing to the frustrations, as Lucy had noted. And it's important to note that not all digital tools are created equal here. So instead of deciding for them like this is we are the experts, we know what you need, we decided to work with them instead and figure out what was the right solution for their team specifically. And that's not to what we use for them may not be the same for another team, but it's just a huge win was being able to find the right solution for them because they grew out of their current one. It was making administrative tasks a little bit more burdensome, and a huge part of it too was it unlocked opportunities for their team and even the end user just to move into that kind of digital process a little bit more. So the new solution, which supported the whole pack, because we do have a pretty it's a pretty unique setup with the SBARC team. So they're also in connection with the field with the like the officers who are on the field, the animal control officers, that's the word. And so they are constantly in communication. And what we did was allow for the JotForm solution to send out email notifications to not only the shelter team so they can look at applications that are being submitted on the fly. That was a huge part that they really loved. The applicant was sent information on what they filled out and what to expect next, which was something completely new for this process as well. Conditional logic was applied, so only the questions that were relevant to that specific applicant were showed. Questions that did not apply to them were hidden, and we put everything into a SharePoint solution for them to keep track of the applications, to allow for easy access for officers who are out in the field who may notice a familiar name or something pop up. They were able to do kind of like a management system within SharePoint that allowed them to apply, or accept or review or just put a hold on what they needed for it. And it ensured like the entire team had access to these applications, and they were able to communicate more effectively as a team because of this.
So Andrea had shared some of the like more granular pieces of the solution, but it's a solution for a reason, right? It's these tools in combination and in like offering some sort of synergy, right, for this team. I don't know why I just used that buzzword, everybody, I'm sorry. But all that to say, it was really critical for this team to get those applications out of a silo for that one particular front desk admin staff and make sure it gets flattened out. So some of the really cool things that came out of our listening phase and the hopes and dreams of, gosh, if we transform this process in this form, what do we expect to see? What kinds of results would tell us that this was successful? And a special shout out, the picture over here, our chief digital officer, Carrie, had almost kicked off the fresh new form. He was one of the first people to use this fresh adoption form when it went live, which was awesome. So that's his sweet dog Pepper. So that was a little special shout out there. Okay, we had an 80% decrease in application time. It went from about 20 minutes, 25 minutes down to like 5 minutes, which is incredible. And to what Andrea described, that conditional change and all that good stuff really helped with that. Another really wonderful thing is sort of period over period, we had a 137% increase in applications just overall, which just means that the form is easier to use, which is awesome. The time it took to review those applications and get those dogs out the door was about 48 hours, down from a week. And in some cases, it's next day. If folks' calendars like work with the hours at the center, they can get their forever friend the next day, which is just like, that is a vulnerable population, right? Those animals shouldn't be in that traumatizing space for very long. Do you see this through line I'm bringing into this narrative, you guys? And we got to do what we can to get them into those safe spaces. So we are, and it's really, really cool. So anyway, we've got a really beautiful increase in adoptions period over period. Like, we're just really proud of how this partnership came to life with the center. And they've as soon as we went live with the form, they were like, okay, so we got a couple more we're ready for you guys to do. They didn't even let us sort of like sleep on this and dwell in the like warm and fuzzy or even cuddle more dogs. They were just like, no, we're ready for you to like do some more transformation, which number one, that's amazing. That's what I, as a director of a division want to hear all the time. But at the same point, it's like, okay, wow, we got a lot more work to do, which we love. So they're a frequent flyer of ours for the division, which is excellent. And it just means that we're doing all sorts of continuous improvement work with them. And again, extending that build with arm of our team. More cute dog pictures, you guys. And all of these photos are of adoptees after the form went live. So this is just literally the best. And if you're curious about any of our other work or any of the other projects, again, in the spectrum of low code to cool digital communications, check out our blog. We're trying our best to like communicate about ourselves, and this is one avenue to do that. So we'd love to share all of those things with you. So be sure to check it out and let us know if you have questions. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Wow, that was adorable. And I say that in all pun intended because my cat's name is Dora. So thank y'all so much for that. We are now ready to move on to answering the questions from our participants. Just a reminder, please, if you haven't already, drop your questions in the Q&A section of the Attendee Hub and vote on the questions that you would like our presenters to answer. We have a few questions lined up already. So I think we can go ahead and start with some of these questions. The first one has 8 votes and it pertains to the first presentation. But I think both of y'all can answer this. Can you speak on allowing those with little to no access? Can you speak more on allowing those with little to no access to computers a way to save progress and continue later? Are there best practices for doing this?
I can start with this one. This is something I discussed a lot with 10X, which is a federal design agency. If you don't know them, they helped out a lot on this project. The sort of solution that we were thinking of is for your initial, what you are saving to not be really saved anywhere, but become its own URL that then recreates what you've already populated in the forms. One thing that really concerns me, both as a lawyer and as a designer, is in paper world, when you are initially filling out your forms, they are yours. You own them until they go to the court, right? The court doesn't get to come into your house and read your forms, right? But where does that data live, right? When you're using the court's website, right? Before you file, right? So it's important to us to not have that data be even accessible to the court before the user has said, I am filing right now, right? And because we don't want the court subpoena, we don't want this whole mess of who owns that data. So essentially the solution was a URL that would repopulate what they've already done.
I can also talk about that too, although mine will be nowhere as fantastic as Emily's. We work largely with people who are experiencing homelessness, and so a lot of that is paper-based. So we also work with individuals. We have document libraries on site, and in our homelessness services space, we have a pretty robust case management space and homelessness services space in addition to the court. That's part of the community court, but we also provide options about where folks can store their documents if they're worried about them getting taken. There are a couple of other churches or other places. I'm pretty lucky to be able to work with a case manager who has training in this and being trauma informed. So we have conversations really frequently about how to support individuals and problem solve around those things.
Amazing. Thank y'all. I see that folks are voting for their question, so thank y'all for participating in that way. Our second question is also to the same team. How can teams new to trauma-informed design get foundational training on making this shift and how they work?
Yeah, I can speak on this. Again, I sort of really benefited from being able to work in this space and with case managers. I feel like this field is emerging, and so there are some really great resources beyond sticky notes. I took training, with a designer in Australia who was providing that training. I think one of the things I've also really benefited from is conversations with Rachel Dekas. She's really amazing and doing some amazing work. She has a training on Innovate Innovate US. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that or misspeaking that. A brief webinar there. And then there's, for the legal space, there's trauma informed law. But I think one of the really great things about trauma work, trauma methodology, is that it's spreading into other fields. So there is quite a bit. I personally come from a biophysical social model. So recognizing that it happens in the body, it happens in your environment, but there are also social realities in play. Thinking through race, gender, and all of these other intersections. So I would say there was one book that was mentioned in the chat, Body Hold the Score, is really great. Yeah, I reach out if you want more like specific resources. Happy to talk more. Hopefully that was a good helpful.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Sarah. Our next question is for our Bend, forget what it's called, South Bend team. And the question is, in proposing job form for the pet adoption org, can you tell us about how you successfully got the org to agree on the software and adopt it?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. And maybe I didn't do well enough of the setup at the top. They were chomping at the bit to do something else. So it really did not take a lot of convincing. And we had also incurred enough trust from them in our listening phase that we had respected them enough and heard them well, that when we positioned the diagram in front of them and they saw it and they saw how thoughtful we were being about this, they were like, yeah, no big deal. So that is by virtue of the fact that we listened for a long time. We put in the work to make sure that we were accurate about how we understood. We had the problem really well defined. And it was kind of a no-brainer at that point for them.
This next question, I think both teams can answer. If you can try to keep your answers to like 1 minute each. How did the admin team and clients respond to the continuous improvement? Were there concerns about frequent changes, throwing off users?
I can answer this one. And one thing that we look for in our continuous improvement was feedback from users on this form. So a lot of the improvements that were being made were things that users had noticed, or even something that we had noticed, and we always would duplicate it first. So there would be a duplication to run some tests before these changes were made, but they were thoughtfully made for the users and also for the team itself, based on feedback that we were getting from as the forms were live. So
Our
I
next
guess.
question.
Oh,
Okay, yes, I was hoping y'all would answer too. Yeah.
okay, so in the context of the court, actually was really hard. The redesigns, I saw some of the questions that so I'm going to address it real quickly. It took a lot of I don't know, it was like a politicizing thing where I had to go to multiple committees and be like, this is why we need this change. Let me show you the data of why this needs to be changed. And because we're the judicial branch, they're like, we don't like change, girl. Like, we've been doing this for 100 years. Like, what are you talking about? And what if the changes don't work? And then we're going to look like a fool. And so I think that it was very difficult, but I think that sort of based off of what everyone's been saying is, as long as you're able to really communicate the fact that, like, look, this isn't working, this is what people are saying, this is what people are needing, it really does go a long way. But there was at least in my project, I left sort of, I like to say that I thought I was going to come in here and like kind of like a wrecking ball and change the whole judicial branch and be like, everything's going to be better now. And I became a farmer. I planted a lot of seeds of like, please, this needs to continue to grow. So that's my best way to answer that question.
Appreciate the answer and analogy. Sometimes we don't get to see it fully fledged, but we can still move the work along. This question is from Vicky, and I think it's for the trauma-informed team. Vicky asks, I'm curious about times. Did your 10 minutes include extremes? I was once told on a government service that it would take me 10 minutes to verify my identity, but as a migrant, it took nearly 2 hours, and I've never forgotten how angry it made me.
I think that's about our sort of form summary thing. I'm not really sure if it really included that, but it should, right? And I think that's something maybe we need to sort of rethink the guidance for that template to include like, hey, it's most users, going to take 10 minutes, but if you have a more complicated case, it may take up to this amount of time. I think this really goes to show why research is so important, right? Is because when we implement these forms, every user designer knows like that moment of testing where you're like, oh, everything I know is wrong. I did everything wrong, right? Or there's this whole group of people I just didn't think about. And so that's hopefully something that would come up in testing, right? That there are migrants who are not going to take 10 minutes to verify their identity. It's going to take a lot longer. And it's like, what makes you mad is not just like that it's taking that long. It's like, you were lied to, right? It's 10 minutes. And so, if we want to like create a system that is honest and transparent, then we have to acknowledge that, yeah, not everybody is going to take 10 minutes. And that's a really, really important point and a really good reason why we're all here talking about this and why we need to kind of talk about it more, is because, you bring up a really important point.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. I think, and the testing that we did for mobile court, a lot of the things that we found were the things that I think would be considered edge cases in other spaces were pretty much occurring on a regular basis. So, if someone didn't have ID, which was very often, if someone, had literacy issues, if someone, because they didn't have access to insurance, didn't have resources to glasses, or resources to glasses, then they couldn't see, right? Our wonderful digital form, right? What are these other options where digitization just, it wasn't going to work, or it was going to take longer. And so I think, again, I'm really thankful. And I think this speaks to sort of like, what is your organization's readiness? When this project was being piloted, one of the conversations that came up was we need to have a case manager. We need to have someone who can support and has experience working in this space, regardless of who is leading this work or overseeing or managing the work. There has to be some resource on site. And I really credit that to the people that I worked with, Yvonne Mbasse, who works our clinical diversion program, and Chris Anderson and Laura Williamson, and our leader, Robert Kingham, because they take that sort of view of being trauma-informed and caring, and wanting to work with individuals with lived experience. So yeah, that infrastructure was there.
Yeah, that's valuable. Leadership matters. We have more time for one more question. I'd love for both of you to answer this, hopefully 1 minute or less. How do you approach barriers created by state and federal regulations governing resident or client-facing communications, including forms? We find this to be a barrier to clear communication.
I'll swing at it. So I actually ended up trying to amend a policy rule. I went through multiple rounds of committees, and I was like, look, we need to change the way that our caption works. You have a YouTube video from 12 years ago that addresses the fact that people don't understand this, and it only has 300 views. So already that user experience isn't working. I don't know how far I got, but I think that was my approach. Just kind of going through the multiple rounds of committees, because that infrastructure is already there, and that's the way that it has to be. That was my experience in the judicial branch within Utah. So that was my approach.
I know we have quite a few lawyers in this conversation, or at least lawyers by trade for a little bit. We love our lawyer, our department lawyer. I owe her like a bunch of cookies and stuff. She has been, for our team, integral for even other projects to opening the doors to streamlining forms online for us, and translating what was on paper into what is going to be an effective digital form. So from my perspective, your legal partners are that. Use them to help find where there's vagueness in the compliance pieces so that you can step beyond it and serve your customers effectively. Our lawyer loves that with us. So I think we're truly lucky in our lawyer, Jenna, who just like loves this stuff, and loves finding and helping us manage that nuance and also identifying places to streamline. So that's where I would say, like, get get your legal team in your back pocket and buy them lunch and get them coffee and stuff, and see like how you can't just leverage that partnership and push it to the limit, because the internet is a living, breathing thing, and we all have access to it, and the computer's in our pocket. So it's not going anywhere, and we got to make sure everybody has access to it in an equitable way. And lawyers can help you do that.
Yes. Thank y'all so much. That wraps up our time. But thank you, audience, for the great questions. And thank you to our speakers for their knowledge. If we can give them a virtual round of applause, please let's do that. Thank you all for your great work. We are now up for a break. So speed networking will be open. You can use this time to connect with other attendees. And then I also encourage you to explore attendees' profiles and connect asynchronously on our attendee hub. With that, we're going to end our stream, but thank you once again, and thank you to our speakers for joining us.